Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Global Market Access for Radio Devices webinar. It's good to have you all here. My name is Lydia Wilkinson. I am the Business Development Associate for the Hull team, although I work within the sales team generally for connected technologies. I'm here to introduce our speaker today, Richard White, and later on I'll be helping to answer questions. Richard White is a chartered manager with over 14 years of experience in product testing, certification, and global market access. He started his career as an approvals engineer and gradually worked up through various positions within Element. And in 2022, he graduated with an MBA from the University of Hull. He now serves as the general manager of the Element Hull laboratory, where we deliver product safety, EMC, and smart technology testing services. His remit as general manager also covers the certification, global market access, and advisory services group here at Element. Rich is a member of several industry organisations, including the FCC, the TCB Council, and the Radio Equipment Directive Compliance Association. He also represents the UK on the IEC Conformity Assessment Board. Rich has experience as a peer reviewer to advisory services projects within Element to ensure that technical correctness and accuracy is achieved across all projects. Rich oversees the delivery of large-scale GMA projects and also supports a wide range of certification projects covering radio, EMC and safety, and also explosive atmosphere against the requirements of various schemes. So he's well informed and he's here today to carry on that discussion about global market access for radio devices. So I'll hand over to Rich.
Okay, thank you very much, Lydia, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. We're here to talk about global market access for radio equipment. As you know, my name is Richard White, and that's about as much introduction as I'm going to do, as Lydia's already introduced me. Thanks for that. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. The agenda for this session on global market access is going to be a general discussion. What is global market access? We're going to talk about the typical routes to market. We're going to have a look at in-country testing with some common pitfalls that regularly catch people out. We're going to have a look at somewhere a little bit different, so a case study on Japan and also a quick case study on Argentina. We're going to briefly talk about safety and how that comes into the picture. We're going to have a quick look at EMC and then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. So, what is global market access? Okay, so global market access is the process of obtaining third-party certification required for your product in order to enter a particular country or market. Usually, the certification is issued by a government body where the product is regulated, and each country will have its own rules and regulations that you must adhere to. So we've done some recent webinars on accessing the UK. As we know, things are a little bit different in the UK at the moment, or they have been for the past few years, although the UK does now recognise the CE mark indefinitely. We've had webinars on CE marking in general and also North America, so FCC and ISED certification for radio equipment. But going beyond that, and that's what we're going to do today, we really need to think about the passport for your product. What do we need to do to unlock all of those other markets out there that we may not know that much about? And the way I see it is some countries, you'll need a product passport. Some countries you'll need a passport and a visa. There's no really one size fits all. Some countries are more difficult and more strict. Some countries are aligned with North American ways of doing things. Some countries are aligned with European ways of doing things. There's no one size fits all. So we're going to take a look through some of the rules today. So, as we say, everywhere is different. So some of the countries we're looking at now, we're looking at places like Mexico, who require in-country testing for safety and radio. We've got South America, so some of the countries there, Brazil, Argentina, they're both in country. And then we've got a whole load of other countries that we're going to look at as well. So China, Korea, for example, Indonesia, they are all in country testing. Australia, they accept EU test reports for some things, and they want third-party safety approval for certain types of products, such as household. South Africa really depends on the product type. Radio approval is governed by ICASA, and that's EU test reports. But if it's not a radio, then we need to look at different ways of doing things. Really, there is no one size fits all. But you will recognise a lot of the general regulations. If you're selling in Europe or the UK at the moment, you will have come up against lots of these. So typically, each country will want to look at radio spectrum regulations. Some countries will want to look at electrical safety, not all of them, but some will, and some will want third-party certification for safety. Some countries will want to look at EMC, but again, even fewer than safety, and even fewer want third-party certification, but we'll talk about that. And then depending on your type of product, you may need to look at medical, you may need to look at explosive atmosphere regulations. But today we're going to try and focus on the type of regulation that is most strict around the world, and that's radio spectrum. Okay, so the reason that I say that radio spectrum certification is most strict around the world, and that's why we're going to look at it today, is that every country has its own scheme. Pretty much outside of Europe, every country will want you to get third-party approval. So on here, we've got things like Japan in the top left corner. They have their own mark. We've got the UAE, we have Korea, we've got Argentina, Peru. This is just a very small list of all the regulations you will need to meet to go into a particular country. The list is actually much bigger. When you look at it globally, everywhere outside of Europe has their own regulator, has their own mark, and has their own set of rules. Radio really is very heavily regulated around the world. So the fact that all countries have their own regulations and requirements, usually the greatest difficulty that we have, or we see our customers having at least, is what do we do? You know, there's no global scheme for radio. It can be very difficult to understand which country requires in-country testing, which country requires FCC reports, EU reports. There really is no one global scheme. So it's all about trying to understand the pathway through to releasing your product. And the world of regulation or global market access does change a lot, as we know. So here's 5 recent changes that I'm going to start with. Some of them not so recent, actually, but important to note, so I left them in there. So Argentina, they've just updated the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi test standard. So everything that needs to be renewed, you need to actually have that tested now. So anything already certified, Argentina certificates, they last 3 years. To renew that certificate, you would need to have it retested. Malaysia, so again, on the renewal front, they have just announced that all certificates that have expired more than 6 months ago can no longer be renewed. You need to go and have that retested. If you were selling in Malaysia, say a year ago, the market's now opened up for you again, your certificate's expired, you need to start again. So China no longer require approval for analog phones. This is the one that's not very new at the moment, but I think it's an interesting one, so I've left it in. So in Vietnam, radio products under 60 milliwatts do not require approval. So that's really important to know, especially if you have a low power device, you know, something like Bluetooth. You don't need to do anything in Vietnam, and that can mean that you can beat competitors to market. There's very little red tape. You do need to make sure that your device is safe and obviously compliant. There are ways to do that, but you can get into that market straight away. And Mexico, this is a brand new one, just last week. They have a new labeling requirement for radio equipment. So there's a new IFTEL logo. Those of you that have sold in Mexico before will know that you just have the IFTEL certification number on the product. There's now a logo to go along with it. So I've started by saying that everywhere is totally different. That's not the full truth. Everywhere has their own rules, regulations, but there are some common routes to market, which is great news for us. So some countries, they will accept EU test reports as a part of the application. So it's really, really important to say now that just because you have an EU test report doesn't mean you don't have to do anything. It just means that you can use that EU test report as a part of your application to avoid further testing. And just remember that usually the test report does need to be accredited by test labs such as Element. Some countries will accept an FCC test report. Again, just because you have an FCC test report doesn't mean you don't have to do anything, but you can use it to speed the process up to get your certification mark. And then finally, some countries, they want you to send a sample to their country so they can test it themselves at an approved local lab. And generally, this process takes a little bit longer, can be a bit more difficult for obvious reasons. Here's some examples of countries that require in-country testing. There are many more, but these are just some of the main examples. So we have Mexico, they require in-country testing for radio as well as safety. Argentina, they also require in-country testing for some safety, not everything, and all radio devices. Brazil is the same. They want radio testing. They might do some EMC and some safety, depending on what it is. And then we have some other countries such as China, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Indonesia. So all of these countries, you're going to need to send samples and have it tested in that particular country before you can access that market. There are others. These are just some of the main ones. So in-country testing, it's usually conducted rather than radiated. And what that means is it's not done in a chamber. So it's done on a bench, connected directly to an analyzer, usually by an SMA cable, which is the photo in the bottom right there. It's often to local standards, but they're often based on European and North American standards themselves. So they might have taken that standard and changed it slightly to meet their own requirements. So usually, if you've passed Europe or North America, you can have a fairly good idea that you should be okay for a particular country. But it really does depend on the type of your device, the power, all that kind of thing. So you're not home and dry just when you've tested for Europe or North America. But it does help. And it also helps in the way that you've already got the test instructions. You know how to set up your device for testing, because that is one of the big barriers. So it is often only radio testing, but sometimes the country will want to do some EMC and safety as well. Depends on the type of device. For example, Brazil, they will want to do some EMC testing on a handheld tablet, for example. Australia, they will want third-party certification on household devices, things like that. It's sometimes done at government-owned test labs. So I know recently Indonesia were one of these countries where it had to be the final stage of the testing, at least, had to be done at a government test lab. And that comes with its own challenges, such as capacity, planning, wait times. And of course, it usually takes longer than other available options because, you have to send the samples, wait for it to be tested and all that kind of thing. So some of the pitfalls for in-country testing to watch out for. Well, the first is to understand the requirement. You want to sell into China. How do you do it? How do you know what to do? Well, that's where you engage with someone like Element. You need to get the sample into the country. And when you think about it, that is a little bit harder than it could be because you are essentially sending an unapproved sample into that country. So you have to make it really, really clear that it's for testing and certification purposes only. It's not for the commercial market. It doesn't have commercial value. The sample will be returned or destroyed after testing, all of that kind of thing. And if you don't do that properly, it will get stuck in customs, which can get very expensive and very, very timely. Then we need to think about language as well. The customs declaration, does that need to be in a specific language? Do my test setup instructions need to be in a specific language? Am I going to have to explain technical details about my product in a way that someone whose native language isn't the same as mine will easily absorb? We need to think about the time that this is all taking. So we need to start planning very early. Some in-country test programs can take months, 2-3 months, quite easily sometimes. So we need to start planning all this in advance. We have time zones to deal with. If you're testing something in China, obviously, if there's a problem and you're in the UK, you're going to have to get up quite early to spend a lot of time with that particular engineer, however it is, on Teams, on the phone, etc., working through any issues. We have translation of things like user manuals, application forms, labels, all of that kind of thing that you need to plan for. And then there will often be a queue of people. So test labs are very busy, but also if you're testing at a government lab or you're waiting for a government certification, you will need to wait in the queue. And it all really comes back to planning. And then, of course, if you have any failures as well, if you have any failures along the way with any testing program, that can cause a problem. So you need to think about this holistically and then build in some time for failures as well. And it all comes back to planning. We need to take the time to plan our whole test program, and we need to plan internally as well for product launches, marketing. The certification is a very important part of the product launch process, but I'm sure there's lots of other things that happen. So you need to take the time to plan upfront. So we're going to look at Japan now for a little while. So the reason I picked Japan to look at is that it falls outside of the typical routes to market that I mentioned. So you might remember that I talked about EU test reports or FCC test reports. They could be used as a part of the application or in-country testing. Well, actually, Japan falls outside of all of those. So Japan, you can test an approved lab such as Element. So we can do radio testing for Japan here. And we're also a certification body for Japan. So you're not really using an EU standard, an FCC standard. You're not testing in country, but you are testing to Japanese standards at an approved test lab. So the regulator in Japan is the MIC, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. Testing is to Japanese specific standards or ordinances, as they're known for Japan. Testing does not have to be done in Japan. However, if you are using a 13.56 megahertz RFID product, that might change because they do regulate that quite heavily. You may need to go and test that in Japan, or as a minimum, it has to be certified by a conformity assessment body who is based in Japan. The certificate must be issued by a conformity assessment body such as Element. So just like if you've done a certification for the FCC North America, you will have used an FCC TCB. Japan works in the same way. You must use a Japanese conformity assessment body. Element are one of those. And the certification number goes on the product label as well as the logo, but we'll look at that in a little bit more detail shortly. So the last time I checked, and I say the last time because this may have changed, there were 16 conformity assessment bodies operating globally. Very proud to say that Element is one of those. So that's really not many, not a large group of labs who can actually issue certification for Japan for radio products. There are even fewer of us who can issue certification for telecoms devices as well. An Element, again, I'm very proud to say that we can do that from the UK and from our office in Shenzhen. So we are a conformity assessment body for radio and telecoms. So looking at the documentation requirements for Japan then, this will be quite familiar for anyone that has put together a technical file for Europe or anyone that has sold their device in North America. They've got things like PCB artwork, label artwork, operational description, user manual. And remember, for Japan, you do need to have a user manual in Japanese, but you don't need that at the time of certification. You can just declare that one will be available. You need a block diagram, schematics, parts list, you need photos. One that's a little bit different for Japan is that you need an ISO 9001 certificate for the manufacturer. You need a set of application forms and declarations, and of course the test reports. So the testing is actually a very small part of the application, very important, but all the documentation you need to start thinking about early and you need to start planning. When you've successfully completed a Japanese certification program for radio equipment, you will be given a certificate. This is an Element certificate here. You can see here you get a certificate number. It will have all the details of your product, and you'll have your product ID, which is circled there in red, and that will go on your product. So this is an example of a Japanese label for MICR, so radio approval. So on the left here, you've got the logo. It looks like it's got a little T in a circle. So that's the Giteki logo. And just to the right of it, you've got some numbers. So the top one, starting with R, that is what you will see on radio equipment. So R standing for radio. And then the number just to the right of that is the product certification number. The bottom one, T, you've probably guessed that's for telecoms. And again, that's the certification number just to the right-hand side of that. The R and the T numbers do work slightly differently, but you can go through that with your conformity assessment body at the time. And here is a real-world example of a Japanese label for approved radio equipment. You can see here you've got the Giteki logo and the number circled in blue. So earlier I did mention that is a little bit different for 13.56 megahertz RFID. If you are using that in your device, you have to use a Japanese certification body based in Japan. Most of the time as well, you actually have to test it in that country, unless the certification body you're using has some kind of agreement with an overseas laboratory. And this is the logo that will need to go on your device. Very different to the logo I've just shown you. This is all in Japanese, of course. And yes, this is for 13.56 megahertz RFID. So something to think about for Japan, which is very unique. I can't think of anywhere globally that does it in the same way. So all radio equipment shall be housed in a single cabinet, and the cabinet shall not be capable of being opened easily. So that's a direct translation from the Japanese regulations. And what we mean by that in practice is just the radio part of the equipment. So for example, you have a device with a radio module in it. That radio module must be housed in a way that is a single cabinet, so you can't access it. So for example, it must be shielded, and that shield must be welded to it or something like that. So ways to stop your radio equipment or the radio part of the equipment from being opened easily, you would have something like a security screw. That's acceptable. You could have some very strong super glue, so a member of the public couldn't just pick up your equipment and access the radio part of it and tamper with it. Or as I mentioned earlier, if you have a module, you could apply some shielding, which is soldered, welded, that kind of thing, and it basically makes it very difficult to access for the general public. And in Japan, radio module approval is allowed. So you can test a radio module, add that into your end device, and you can then use that approval to go and sell the product in terms of radio equipment certification. Okay, we're going to have a quick look at another case study now, Argentina. I picked Argentina because it does have some language requirements. You do have to test in country. So it is quite difficult and it's quite lengthy as well. So Argentina, the regulator is known as ENACOM, or more recently Ramatel. That was a recent change. The radio testing must be done in Argentina at an accredited lab, not a government-owned lab, just an accredited lab. You need a Spanish user manual, and this time you do need the Spanish user manual at the time of certification, as opposed to Japan, when you could have a declaration to say that you will provide one in Japanese at the point of sale. You need a local representative in Argentina, so that is someone based in Argentina, a registered business, who will act as a local representative on behalf of your product if there's something like a product recall or if there's a question. The authorities in Argentina, they want to actually talk to someone in country. An Element can provide that service for you if you require it. The lead time is quite long. Generally, in Argentina, you're looking at least 10 to 14 weeks. That's because of the approval process after testing. You remember earlier I said about in-country testing pitfalls. You end up in a queue with the regulator. That certainly happens in Argentina. And your certificate is generally valid for 3 years. The renewal is usually paperwork, but again, going back to earlier in the presentation, there has been a standard change in Argentina for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi devices, meaning that you have to retest. So you can find all the regulations for Argentina on their website. However, they are all in Spanish. And again, that's one of the pitfalls. It comes back to translation and understanding of the process. So in summary, For Argentina, you would need to identify the requirements. You would need to arrange for a lab or an agent to send the samples to for testing. Element can help you with that. You would need to prepare the documentation. So there are some forms to fill in Spanish, Spanish manual. You would need lots of photos, test setup instructions as well. You would then have the testing carried out in Argentina. You would also need to provide an example label, just as a reminder there. The lab would submit the test reports and documents for approval to the regulator once all the testing is successfully complete. You would then have a certificate issued after a few weeks wait in that queue with the regulator. You would then be able to label the device and sell it in Argentina. This tends to take about 12 to 14 weeks. And here's another example of a label. So you've got the Ramatel ID there circled in red. That's the Argentina label. And just like our previous example, radio module approval is allowed in Argentina. So generally, you will need to think about labeling for any country that you're going into. I'm sure you've all sold into Europe before, so you know CE marking quite well. Some of you might have sold into North America, so you know the FCC ID. But there are other things that you need to think about as soon as you leave those territories. So here's a very basic example of a product that is being sold in Taiwan, North America, Canada, and Europe. So you can see at the top, we've got the CE marking, we've got the FCC logo, which is for FCC EMC, and we've got the FCC ID a little bit further down, along with the IC ID, which will cover North America. We have some safety information, which is a requirement for Europe and some other countries. And then you can see we have the NCC logo, which is Taiwan Radio. And to the right, we've got the BSMI logo, which is Taiwan EMC certification. So very simple change. You've sold it into one additional country, which is Taiwan, but you have things to think about in your planning and manufacturing phase. Some countries allow you to have the label in a battery compartment, but just remember, most countries, when you're doing that, they do state that the label has to be visible at the point of sale. So again, something you need to think about when you're packaging. If you were going to take a route such as this, you would need to supply the device with batteries removed, cover removed, so that the end user can clearly see what certifications that the product has when they pick it up. So on this example here, we've got, again, North America. Then we've got the WPC ID, which is for India, which isn't mandatory, by the way, but this manufacturer has added it anyway. We have the Anatel ID, which is Brazil. We've got the COFTEL number, which you can see that this is actually a very old photo, because that's what IFTEL used to be called for Mexico. And we've got the CMIIT ID, which is for China. We've got Indonesia on the top right. We have Ukraine, and we also have, just at the bottom again, we have Taiwan. So e-labeling. What about e-labeling? Some countries allow it, some don't. You'll see on the example here, we've actually got the CE mark here. The eagle-eyed of you out there will see that we've got the notified body number crossed out because that's no longer mandatory under the Radio Equipment Directive, and the alert symbol. Again, that's something that that went in the change from the RNTTE to the Radio Equipment Directive. But we've also got other things here, such as, again, North America, we have Australia, we have Japan, we have Singapore. Some of these countries do allow e-labeling. Interestingly, there is no allowance for e-labeling for Europe, but this example has it anyway, because you can do both. I'm sure that the CE mark is on the product as well. And some of the countries, they do stipulate that if e-labeling is allowed, the user must be able to access the e-label within 3 clicks. And I know that North America and Brazil do implement that rule. So summary then for radio GMA, that was a really quick whistle-stop tour of radio certification globally. So there were 3 main routes: in-country testing, using of EU reports, or using of US reports or FCC reports as a part of your application. Some countries accept modular approval, but some don't. There is no pattern to this. It's just what that particular country has decided to accept. You might need a local representative. We looked at an example of Japan where you didn't, and Argentina where you did. Again, I would say it's around 50-50 of countries that do require a local representative. Most of the time, Element can help you with this. You will probably need to do some translating. The two examples we looked at, Japan and Argentina, you certainly do. Some countries you don't. They're fine with accepting English manuals. It really does depend on the own country's rules and regulations. You need to think about labeling your product early. Where are you selling this? How much space do you have on your label? You need to get the label designed, all that kind of thing. And there are many common pitfalls, so you need to plan carefully. What about safety? We've talked about radio, very heavily regulated around the world. You're going to need to do something in every country. Well, safety is a slightly different, actually. So there are some globally recognized certification agreements that operate within harmonized rules and sometimes in lieu of local certification. So the IEC is a great example of this. They run 4 schemes, the IEC EECB scheme, IEC EX scheme for EX devices. We have IEC Q for components and IEC RE for renewable energy. So at the moment, there are around 54 member states of the CB scheme. This is the IEC EECB scheme, sorry, which is normal location safety. But not all members are members for every standard type. You may be selling a medical product to a particular country. Because it's medical, they want to test it themselves, or because it's household, they want to test it themselves, etc., etc. So safety is easy. That's what I've just taken from that. But actually, the answer is not really. No, not all the time. Particularly for some countries or some product types, it is actually more challenging. So the thing to not get caught out with safety certification is that just because you have CB certification, you can access that market without needing to do anything else. And that's not true. It's very similar to the example that I gave earlier, when you can use an EU radio test report as a part of an application. Safety for some countries is the same. You'll notice at the bottom right there, we've got the CCC logo for China, and that's a good example of this. You can have IEC CB scheme certification for your product, but if you want to go and sell in China and it falls within the scope of CCC, you will need to do things like have a factory inspection. You'll need to fill out a lot of application forms in local language. You'll need to provide a label in local language. And if there are any critical components, such as a fuse, you will need to have that separately approved or buy an approved fuse for CCC. So safety is not always quite as easy as it seems. So an example of some of the countries that require third-party safety certification, I'm just going to call some of these out. So Mexico, in-country testing for safety. Brazil and Argentina depends on the product. Australia depends on the product. So if it's a household device, you're probably going to need to do something. That's not in-country testing, but you do need certification from a certification body based in Australia. You can use a CB report for most standards. India, so BIS approval. A lot of that is in-country safety testing, and you have to do the approval in the name of the factory, which can get tricky. You've got South Africa, which is an interesting one. I would say South Africa is actually much easier to approve a radio device because you can get ICASA approval. The moment it is not a radio device, you have to go and do safety approval and EMC approval as separate activities. So you basically double in your workload there. And lots of other countries there that need some kind of safety approval. So how about EMC? Luckily, EMC is actually slightly easier. Once you get out of Europe and North America, EMC is less regulated globally. That doesn't mean it isn't, but just less countries want to see EMC testing and certification. So some examples here, reading left to right from the top. So we have Japan, who require VCCI certification, although I would say that's voluntary, but it's very much a market-driven requirement. So most people buying your product in Japan will expect to see that. We have Korea, so that's mandatory in-country testing a lot of the time, although you can do some testing in North America or Europe, but it depends on the size of the lab that you have. size of the chamber, it can become very specific. So sometimes it is easier to test in Korea itself. We have Taiwan, BSMI. Then bottom left, we have South Africa. So that's SAB certification. They want to look at EMC. Sometimes, well, you did used to have to do in-country testing for EMC. You can now use EU test reports, but the rules are in flux a little bit for South Africa, I would say. We have Australia, which is a little bit different. So you can use EU test reports. You don't need certification, but you do need a self-declaration, and you do need a local representative. So again, there's work to do there. And then bottom right would be Brazil. So they only regulate EMC for some product types. So EMC often depends on the type of device. So you might need to go and get the HS code for your device to see if it falls in scope. It can apply to radio devices and also non-radio devices. It really does depend on what your product is. Some countries accept EU test reports, such as Hong Kong, Morocco, Russia, as a part of the application. Others, they actually want you to test to their standards, such as South Korea, Brazil. And some schemes are voluntary, such as Japan, VCCI, but very much market-driven, so consumers generally expect to see it. So the main message on EMC, and in general actually for radio and safety, is that there is no pattern or set rule. Every country is different. There are actually a few patterns that you would start to recognize when you've been doing this for a long time, like I have. Middle East, for example, they will generally accept EU test reports as a way to get approval. South America will accept North American reports. So there are a few patterns that you can start to recognize, but it can change. It is up to that particular country. So with all that in mind, you might be thinking, I'm going to need some help here. That ends a whirlwind tour of global approvals for radio devices. But as you can see, it really is a whirlwind tour. There are lots of different rules, different routes, many nuances. Some countries require local reps, local languages. It really is different. So with all the rules and regulations, I'm sure you're thinking, wow, I might need some help. And that is why you would use an expert GMA team. So here on screen, I just want to quickly show you what happens when you plan your product launch early and you plan up front. So here we have a typical product launch with some time invested, and then a product launch, hopefully with some profit. What we often see here in Element is when a customer doesn't embrace the differences of global market access, doesn't quite understand the trials and tribulations of accessing many countries, we can see failures, we can see delays for many reasons. And unfortunately, this does delay a product launch, which will impact your profit. So by planning early, talking to experts, understanding that there are many difficult rules and regulations, we can actually help you get your product launched on time or earlier, and hopefully that will help you with a successful launch. And then very quickly, just to understand the general services of Element as a test lab or some other test labs, and where global market access fits into that. So we generally have global market access at the end of a test program because we've done all the testing for Europe, North America. We then use those reports to go and access lots of different markets for our customers. Actually, we do have some other services at the front, such as our advisory team. So advisory provides upfront pre-project assistance with understanding of regulations, writing test plans, writing compliance strategies, drafting DOCs, etc. Again, this is all part of the planning phase that can be really helpful for our customers. We have the testing phase, which everyone understands what it is, but again, it can be quite difficult if you don't understand what you're actually testing. That's where advisory comes into it to really help you hit the ground running. We have certification services, and the difference between certification and global market access, if anyone's wondering, for us that work at Element anyway, is that certification, we handle all of that internally ourselves. So we do things like IEC CB certification, we do FCC and ISED approval, we do MIC approval for Japan. All of these things Element handles themselves internally. It's an Element certificate that you will receive, or at least it's Element running the scheme. And then global market access. That is where we use third-party test labs, third-party partners, and generally that is because there's a rule and regulation within that particular country that means that Element cannot do it for you. So at this stage, I just want to say thank you, everyone, those that are still here with us. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today, and I look forward to answering any questions. Thank you very much.
Hi there, everyone. So thank you for joining us again, as I said at the beginning of that of the presentation. Thank you, Rich, for all that information. It's much appreciated. He's gone shy on me now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the questions that you guys have asked. If we don't get through everything today, then we will do our best to get back to you via email. But also, if you have any inquiries at the end, of the presentation, then please send them to commercial.team@element.com. So that's myself in the sales team and all of my colleagues who can help to answer questions, direct them to Rich where necessary. And if you've got inquiries for projects or work that you need to happen soon, then by all means, give us a shout. That's what we're here for. So we've got a handful of questions here, and I think we've got a good amount of time to answer a few of them. So I'll read them out and we'll have Rich answer. So one of the main questions we're getting is about the UKCA and the CE mark. So now that the UK accepts the CE mark indefinitely, is the UKCA mark now dead and gone? So Rich, can you help to answer that?
Yeah, good question. It is something that we get asked quite a lot. I wouldn't say it was dead, so it's just not mandatory for all product types. So UKCA is still very much alive for many types of products. But we are currently accepting CE marking indefinitely for 21 types of product, and in that are the types of product that we included in this seminar, such as equipment falling under the Radio Equipment Directive, EMC, and safety. So not dead, just not mandatory for all types of product. So always make sure that you're looking at the regulations and just double check which types of product that CE marking is accepted for and which it isn't. You don't want to get caught out.
Thanks, Rich. So next question. Andy, I hope that helps, by the way, thank you. Mahul asks, in-country safety testing for Mexico, I believe Norm Approvals has a wide exclusions list and many product types do not require compliance. Can you expand on that, Rich?
Yeah, so for Mexico, most of the requirements are based on the product HS code. So that's the harmonized system code, and it's used in customs around the world to identify type of product. If you're not sure what it is, there's a government website that'll tell you all about it, or you can check with someone in logistics or shipping. They should be able to tell you. There are some exclusions for Mexico. Mostly it tends to be industrial equipment, but again, it is very strictly linked to the HS code. So I would either check with your lab in Mexico or check with someone like Element. We can confirm that for you.
So Michael asks, is the ISO 9001 certificate for Japan certification the one from the radio module manufacturer or from the host equipment manufacturer?
So it depends on what you're actually trying to approve. So if you're applying for certification of a radio module, then we would expect it's from the radio module manufacturer. That might be you, or it might be a third party. If you're approving host equipment, then we would expect it to be for the host manufacturer. It really is who is manufacturing the product that you're looking to certify. I would also add to that ISO 9001 is one way of showing that you meet the quality requirements. If you don't have it, there are other ways and means. There's a questionnaire that asks you about your processes and procedures. So don't worry too much if you don't have it. It's not going to exclude you from getting certification, but it'll certainly make your life easier.
Okay, perfect. Got a question here from Will. Hi, Will. is the Argentina requirements for new registration, is that for all registrations, i.e. an existing product would need re-registering and retesting?
So it applies to all new registrations and anything that is coming up for renewal. So if you have a product that has 1 year left on a certificate, for example, because Argentina certificates valid for 3 years, at the time of renewal, you will need to have that product tested to bridge the gap in between the old standard and the new standard. So it really does depend, but yes, it is a requirement for everything going through certifications, whether that's new or a renewal. But remember, it's only certain types of products, so Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, that kind of thing.
Okay, Dirk. And is there a choice between end product and radio module certification for Argentina?
Yeah, there is. Argentina allow modular approval. It really depends if you actually have a module. So you can't just say that an end product is a module. It has to meet the requirements of a module, very much like the FCC. So for example, it would need its own shielding, its own voltage regulation, all that kind of thing. So you would need to look up the requirements for a module, or contact us, we can let you know what they are. And then, yeah, you can go ahead and use the modular approval route.
Perfect. Okay. There's one question here from Dominique, and essentially they're asking, is that on the label that you showed for the example showed for the FCC logo and the FCC ID were both on the label. Is there do they both have to be there? Is the reason that they're both stipulated on there?
Okay, that's a really good question. So it depends on the functionality of the device. So think of it like this. If you have a device where the radio is turned off, it's essentially a paperweight, so there's nothing going on there, then you only need to go through the FCC radio certification, because without the radio, nothing is happening. If it has functionality when the radio isn't switched on, then you need to meet the FCC EMC requirements as well. So that's a situation where you would have both.
Okay, great. So how do governments ensure legitimacy of approvals / certifications and logos on products sold within that country? So for example, products can have their logos and IDs on their labels without ever going through approvals and being checked by local governments.
Yeah. So many of them have databases that will be linked to some kind of electronic customs system. So the customs officials will actually look up and make sure that it is actually genuine. FCC are the best at that, for example, and Canada and lots of other countries do it like that. Some countries will actually email test labs and say, is this test report genuine? Did you test it? I know that Philippines do that quite a lot. So they will often cross-reference the certification against a database. They'll also do market surveillance as well. We do that in the UK, for example. Even if it is self-declaration, you might get picked up for market surveillance and they'll check your technical file.
Brilliant. I've had a couple of questions just about the slide deck and about contact lists for the UK-based services. So yes, the email, the slide deck will be distributed between everybody who's joined today, so you will have access to the presentation. And also, if you do have inquiries about the services that we offer, then by all means, please feel free to contact me, which on lydia.wilkinson@element.com. But also, please use the general email that I gave earlier, which is commercial.team@element.com. Equally, I think a lot of people will be contacted today after the webinar just to ask how it went and what your thoughts are. So at some point someone should be in contact, but if you have initial inquiries, then please don't hesitate to contact myself and the team. So I've got another question from Will here, which is where do SAR testing requirements and are the rules the same for pure radio testing? I think that's maybe slightly confused there, but what are the SAR testing requirements essentially, and what are the rules for the same for pure radio testing? And do other countries have additional SAR requirements beyond us and the FCC?
Yeah, okay. Well, they differ, is the answer, from country to country. Some countries will accept FCC test reports, for example, because SAR testing is pretty complicated and it's not as developed around the world. Some countries will accept EURF exposure certificates and test reports, And there are very few other countries that actually do SAR testing themselves. I know that. I think I've had it done in Brazil before. That's one of them. So usually, if it's a product that needs SAR, you're going to go and rely on the FCC SAR report or the European SAR report. Either way, you do need to think about it. But there is no global scheme for it. It will vary from country to country.
Okay. Now this is a good one because it's not something I've considered previously either. So thank you, Gary. What if a buyer buys from us from another country, but we are not selling into that country?
Buyer buys from us from another country.
So you're not necessarily selling into that territory as a marketed device for that territory, but somebody, I'm going to assume here, Gary, but maybe buys online and it gets shipped to them. Where are the grey areas for that?
So that is all about having very clear guidelines and instructions that you send with the product. That will happen all the time when you think about it. We've all bought products and then gone on holiday, for example.
Yeah.
You're essentially taking radio equipment into that country. I'm pretty sure that in the documentation you get with that, it will be very clear this device is certified for these particular countries. And as a manufacturer, that's about as much as you can do, to be honest. You can't stop people purchasing from you and taking it to another country. However, if someone from another country does purchase from you and they want that device shipping to where they are, it might not get through customs, is what I would say. That's what customs and borders are designed to do. So it probably wouldn't get through that country. You would need to think about accepting that order. If you accepted an order for your equipment, for example, to North America, and you try to send it into that country, you are actually trying to make a sale into that country. So you do need to be careful and manage that risk. But you just need to be very clear on where it's approved for and what the rules of engagement are with your product.
Okay, thanks, Rich. I've got a question here from Matthew Allett. Hi, Matthew. Good to see you here. If a component, i.e. a Wi-Fi module, already holds regulatory radio approvals, do all countries require further radio testing of the product in which the component is being used?
It really depends on the country. So, for example, Hong Kong, generally, they want you to test the actual end product, even if the module is approved. Australia, they wouldn't. They're happy to accept a radio report for a module, but then they want to do EMC testing on the host product. So what I would say to you there is have a look at the countries the module's approved for, work out which countries accept modular approval or come and talk to us, and then you'll be able to bridge the gaps. So some will want more testing, some won't. Many countries will still want you to certify that product, but they'll accept the radio module test report as a part of the application to certify the end device, if that makes sense. You'll just have to draw up some kind of declaration to say that we use this module, and you might have to get authority from the module provider to use their test reports.
Okay, great. Here's a question from Rodrigo. Can we have family approval for Mexico and Argentina, or at least leverage radio test reports to cover other similar devices?
So for Mexico, you used to be able to, I would say up until around a year ago, and typically they now want to approve each device, but you can leverage the testing, I believe. So you can test a radio product as long as it's very similar. You can reuse that test report to make the application for various models, but generally these days you will get a certificate per model. I believe off the top of my head, I think Argentina is the same. I think it's one model per certificate off the top of my head, but I can check that and let you know. Other countries, it really does depend on the country. Some allow family approval, some don't.
Okay, got another one here about Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modular approval. Is it accepted in China and South Korea, or is it required to be tested in country?
Very good question, because China, you can use an approved radio module if it's used in IT or household equipment. If you're using anything else, it needs to be on the end device, and you generally need to test the end device. South Korea, radio module approval is okay, but you do need to get EMC approval on the end device as well. So either way, you can have something. You have to do radio and EMC in Korea.
Okay, brilliant. Alan says, thank you for the great information. Thank you, Alan, you're welcome. When he asks, when you state modular approval, does this mean certifying a module to be sold as a module or incorporating a module within a product?
Both, actually. So if you get full modular approval, you can sell that module for other installers to put it in their host device, as long as they've followed your instructions, not changed it, used the right antennas, all that kind of thing, then they're good to go, unless there's any other EMC safety requirements that we've already talked about. Or you can use that radio module in your own host devices and then sell the host device. So the answer is both.
Okay, great. So we've got another question here. Which countries allow radio functions to be SW disabled, i.e. HW still present? For instance, to sell the same hardware product in country where they don't have radio approvals and using software to disable that radio?
In my experience, most of them are fine with that, but you do need to lock out the module by firmware. So it's impossible for the end user to enable that radio, and you need to write a written declaration to state that's the case. You need to include it in the shipment. When you send it to customs, make it really clear, because they're going to ask you about that, and just make double sure that someone can't go and activate that device. But in general, yes, you should be okay doing that in most places.
Okay. And then we've got another question from Mahul, and it reads, with all the rigorous procedures in place, how can some poor quality items make it through, i.e. unsafe batteries and products? I think what you're asking is how does this happen? And I think probably as working in a test house, you want to say, well, it shouldn't really. We don't have much experience seeing things that genuinely are completely unsafe to enter into territories, but it can happen. I don't know, Rich, do you have any feedback on that one?
I agree. It really does depend on the amount of market surveillance that is carried out, the effectiveness of each country's regulatory scheme. Yeah, that's it. It shouldn't happen, but we all know, unfortunately, from time to time it does. Usually when it comes to products like batteries, there generally ends up being consequences. They do get pulled from the shelf. Other manufacturers do report this. Consumers now report it. You know, in the global digital world, if there's a dodgy product out there, a lot of the time people know about it very quickly. But yeah, it all comes down to the amount of market surveillance.
Yeah, I think Mexico is a prime example of this, because you know, a long time ago there weren't as many strict mandatory requirements, but now, you know, you've got the market surveillance for IFTEL, and there's nothing you can do to get around that norm. And the in-country testing being mandatory in most places means that it's very hard for that to happen. But it's, you know, depending on the product and its necessary approvals from testing to certification, things sometimes slip through the cracks. But obviously Element are a company that are here to try and make sure that that's not happening. So not only making sure that we've got those certificates in place, but prior to that, that the devices have been tested safely and efficiently. So I think with that in mind, and as we draw closer to the end of the webinar, now we've got through, I think, most of your questions. One thing I want to say is, if you've got queries after this, again, please contact us. It's what we're here to do. No question is a silly question, and I always say to my clients, if you don't ask, you don't get. If there's something you need, then please let us know, because that's what we're here for. Again, all the slides will be emailed out to you guys, so you'll have the presentation available to you, and I hope to hear from, you know, a few of you soon. It's good to have you here, and I think we'll thank Rich for his presentation today, and let all of you go. Have a lovely evening, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, everyone.